Look, I'm very sympathetic to the people whose lives were impacted by the lawfare of the Biden administration. I mean, you're talking about hundreds of people whose lives were essentially ruined. They were dealing with years of litigation. I mean, went into massive $100,000 debt.
People who
were associated with him. I'm talking about people
officers.
who worked with him in the administration who couldn't get jobs, were blacklisted after. So I'm very sympathetic. Like Hope Hicks, people who couldn't get jobs.
Hope Hicks was never charged with anything.
Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. In today's video, Abby Phillip goes head-to-head with Lydia Moynihan on Newsnight, with Abby Phillip as tensions flare over Donald Trump's proposed $1.7 billion compensation fund tied to January 6th investigations. Abby Phillip challenges the use of taxpayer money to support Trump allies, while Lydia Moynihan pushes back in this intense CNN debate on corruption, accountability, and political favoritism. Let's get into it and watch the clash unfold.
Tonight, an unusual proposal from the Trump administration that critics are calling absurd, extraordinary, and outright corrupt. According to ABC, Donald Trump is expected to drop his $10 billion lawsuit against the IRS in exchange for the creation of a political slush fund for MAGA allies who were investigated by President Biden. Now, the $1.7 billion weaponization fund for MAGA allies would get out ahead of a judge potentially just dismissing Trump's IRS case, and it would be paid for by taxpayers, according to the New York Times. For months, Trump World has explored the concept of a compensation fund for allies who incurred legal fees during those Biden-era investigations of Trump. And the money would be made available to the nearly 1,600 people with charges related to the Capitol riot. According to ABC, final terms of the settlement will not be set until they are officially announced. This is on several levels a pretty extraordinary thing. And I think just to understand why we're even talking about this, one thing you've got to know is that the case that Trump has against the government for the IRS might be thrown out simply because he runs the government. And for obvious reasons, it doesn't really make a lot of sense for his own Justice Department to decide whether or not he gets a massive multi-billion-dollar payout. So instead, they're going to create a $1.7 billion fund to potentially compensate pardoned January 6th rioters? How does that work?
Look, I'm very sympathetic to the people whose lives were impacted by the lawfare of the Biden administration. I mean, you're talking about hundreds of people whose lives were essentially ruined. They were dealing with years of litigation. I mean, went into massive $100,000 debt.
People who
were associated with him.
I'm
talking about people who worked with him in the administration who couldn't get jobs, were blacklisted after. So I'm very sympathetic. Like Hope Hicks, people who couldn't get jobs.
Hope Hicks was never charged with anything.
No, but I'm saying the lawfare, the people who had to spend years of their lives in response. I'm very sympathetic to that.
She was held accountable for upholding an insurrection, so people wouldn't hire her?
People who happened to be working in the administration to defend America and do what they thought was best.
Private employers decided
their lives were upended.
But also,
I'm very sympathetic to that.
I don't think she's a great example because Hope Hicks was hired, okay? She was hired in private sector jobs after leaving the administration. She's fine.
My point is, I'm very sympathetic to those people. I don't know that this is the mechanism to right that wrong. I think there's a lot of questions about how the funds will be allocated and how it's actually going to be.
I think this puts Todd Bland.
Please like, subscribe, and share. This debate showed why many Americans are uneasy about taxpayer money being tied to political loyalty. The proposed $1.7 billion compensation fund connected to Trump allies and January 6th investigations has sparked serious ethical questions, especially since the court system already exists for anyone claiming unfair prosecution. Critics argue that creating a separate government-funded program for one political group appears more like favoritism than equal justice. Accountability remains another major concern. Over 140 police officers were injured during the Capitol riot, and several participants were convicted of assault, obstruction, and other violent offenses. Even if some people were treated unfairly, opponents say grouping everyone into one reimbursement plan downplays the severity of that day and forces taxpayers to finance relief linked to an event many still consider an attack on democracy. Questions have also been raised about possible conflicts of interest surrounding the timing of the proposal, particularly with Trump's ongoing legal disputes involving the Justice Department. That has increased concerns over whether political influence could interfere with standard legal oversight. Beyond the political arguments, the financial scale is massive. The proposed fund would be larger than the yearly budgets of many federal oversight agencies, while key details about eligibility, transparency, and protections against misuse remain unclear. In the end, this issue goes beyond party politics. Whether people support Trump or oppose him, many Americans believe public funds should never be handed out based on political loyalty without strong oversight, transparency, and equal application of the law.
As well, because Tom Tillis, senator from North Carolina, has said that he is iffy on pushing forth his nomination if Todd Blanche doesn't admit that the people at January 6th committed a crime. So I think being a part of this fund, it'll be interesting to see how the Justice Department is able to get Todd Blanche forward if this moves forward with the January 6th.
Yeah, I'll say on the surface, I mean, it smells bad when you hear this and you read the stories. But I would make 2 points. First, in the New York Times version of this story, they claim that this fund is being fast-tracked. But then at the same time, twice they say that nothing has been improved, nothing has been finalized. This wouldn't be the first time that stories like this pop up about the administration, something leaks out, it's kind of trial ballooned, and then nothing ever comes of it. The second point is, I do believe that people in this country who are wrongfully accused, wrongfully prosecuted, are eligible for restitution. I'm not saying every single person that we're talking about here should get it. I don't think all 1,600 rioters on January 6th should get a single dime or cent out of this. But if there are people who can make a case that they were wrongfully prosecuted, wrongfully targeted by the Biden administration, then they should have some restitution, just like any other American.
That's a generic statement that I think sounds good if you don't pay attention to the details of what we're actually talking about here, which is that these are all people that Trump has already, through an official act, suggested were wrongfully prosecuted. The president is then now saying, potentially, that they're going to create a fund that would allow those very people. There's no mechanism for distinguishing the pardons of cop beaters from anybody else, right? They're all pardoned. They could all be, why would they not all be eligible for this fund?
Can I just say, I want to say very genuinely, I appreciate Lydia and Pete, you all acknowledging how bad this looks. I think it's important that Republicans, that conservatives call this out. My second challenge to you will be, what are you going to do about it? Because I can just tell you, Donald Trump does things like this all the time. He creates these tests for folks like you.
Again, this is still a hypothetical.
Okay.
It hasn't happened.
Let's say hypothetically $1 billion slush fund paid by taxpayers is created. I hope that you continue to use your voice the way you do. And I hope that Republicans in elected office take a cue from you and actually do their job, hold them accountable, do the oversight. And if they don't do the oversight, it's going to be part of the reason why they are not in office come this November.
Is that a challenge to Todd Blanche?
I think so.
Please like, subscribe, and share. This discussion points to a much larger constitutional issue that often gets overlooked in political arguments: how taxpayer money can legally be distributed. Under the Appropriations Clause of the U.S. Constitution, federal spending generally requires approval from Congress. That's why most compensation programs in U.S. history, whether for veterans, victims of terrorism, or wrongful convictions, were established through legislation instead of direct executive action. Critics say this proposal raises major separation of powers concerns because it seems to depend heavily on executive authority rather than independent oversight. In previous compensation programs, eligibility standards were clearly defined and reviewed by neutral panels to avoid political favoritism. Fairness is another key concern. The legal system already offers remedies for wrongful prosecution through civil rights lawsuits and federal court claims, where judges, not political leaders, determine compensation. Opponents argue that creating a separate process tied to presidential decisions could weaken long-standing legal protections meant to keep justice impartial. Public trust also plays a major role. Studies have repeatedly shown that government compensation programs lose credibility when people believe benefits are based on political loyalty instead of objective harm. Critics say the central issue is not simply politics, but transparency, oversight, and proper legal process. Without congressional approval, clear standards, and independent review, a fund like this would almost certainly face constitutional challenges and heavy court scrutiny. At the end of the day, many Americans believe taxpayer money should be governed by the same legal standards for everyone, no matter their political views. Now think about this for a second. Are you tired of only hearing one side of the story from biased media outlets? One network reports one version, while another says something completely different. That's where ground news comes in. It allows you to compare how left, right, and center news organizations cover the exact same story, helping you see the full picture instead of getting trapped in an echo chamber. And the best part is, please like, subscribe, and share.